Yeah, you're on mute.
I will unmute him.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Good
morning. Good morning, everybody.
Line, so it's a little bit difficult. Please mention
Okay. Okay. All right. People will continue joining us. We have about 268 people, and we will be streaming it live on Facebook on the ministry Facebook site. So I'll go ahead and start. Stelling everyone. Your Excellency, State Minister, Professor Afawork, Kasu, our distinguished guest, Mr. Jamie Casap, the Chief Global Education Evangelist at Google, Inc., distinguished chairs, co-chairs, and members of MoSHE Advisory Education Task Force, presidents of Ethiopian Higher Institutes and TVT, faculty and colleagues. I now welcome you to this speaking engagement entitled Innovative Solutions for Education, Insights and Experience by Mr. J.C. Casap. My name is Bethlehem Groneberg. I'm one of the chairs of the Ministry of Science and Higher Education, MoSHE Advisory Council. I am also a member of the Education Delivery Task Force set up by the Council in light of COVID-19 to help with the transition effort of scrambling the Ethiopian Higher Institute to an online learning system. The MoSHE Advisory Council consists of seasoned professional tasked with proposing strategic directions, implementing programs and initiatives, as well as providing support in deploying human, logistical, and financial resources. We are educators, technologists, medical professionals, engineers, and the like. Our goal is to solve real-world problems. Along with the global community, we find ourselves amidst a pandemic, a real-world problem. So we understand the solution starts with a conversation of engaged stakeholders and the right people at the table. Those are the students, the educators, the platform and content providers, as well as institutions who can partner with us to assist in this compounded issue of hardware, software, and connectivity. So by way of introduction, I would like to say a few words about our guest, Mr. Jamie Casap. I first met Mr. Casap at a Global Mind Education Conference in Denver, Colorado, and was really inspired by his insightful speech. I remember Mr. Casap asking himself, why am I so deeply involved in education? And he answers his own question. It's because I understand that education is the silver bullet, that education has the power to disrupt poverty, that education can change a family's destiny in just one generation. We can all relate to this as being a group of professionals who have been educated in Ethiopia, a lot of us. So, and because of this is how you know that we have the right person at the table. I would be remiss though if I didn't quote his most famous quote, most famous saying, and my personal favorite, and that is, he said, don't ask a student what she wants to be when she grows up. Ask her what problem she wants to solve, and then give her the environment to build the knowledge, the skills, and abilities she needs to solve that problem. And I would add, Mr. Casap, and then watch her blaze the trail and set the torch for others. I'm passionate about the cascading effect of educating a younger, especially with computer science skills, which is appropriate for the 21st century. Mr. Casap later came to my town as a coincidence to deliver a well-attended TEDx speech. Now it's time for Ethiopia, and I'm grateful that he said yes to be here late into the night in his time zone. Mr. Casap's opportunity-driven vision for inclusiveness is an integral part of Google's future. As part of Google's education team for the past 14 plus years, Mr. Casap works with universities and K-12 districts using Google Apps and Chromebooks and works across teams to integrate technology into the classroom and ensure the tools the company builds are easy to use and manage. Jamie evangelizes the power and potential of the web, technology, Google tools as enabling and supporting capabilities in pursuit of creating powerful learning modules. Jamie works with educational organizations around the world, helping them find ways to continuously improve quality of education by utilizing and enabling technology capabilities. Jamie is a member of the Google for Education team and works across other Google teams, including Google Fiber, the Google Policy team, the YouTube team, and the Google Capital team. Mr. Casap was responsible for launching Google Apps for Education, the G Suites, into the university space in 2006. He signed Arizona State University, the first major university to switch from using their own email platform to putting it on the G Suite platform. In addition to his role at Google, Jamie serves on the board of directors for the Arizona Science Foundation, New Global Citizens, Arizona Chamber of Commerce, Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, and serves as advisor to dozens of organizations focused on education and access, including South by Southwest EDU, the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and he is a council member of the GSU Advisors. So we are in for a treat. Here is a program for our time together here. From left to right, if you can see the slide, we'll start with a welcome remark by His Excellency Professor Afewerki Kasu. The welcome will be followed by the keynote speech of Mr. Casap. After the speech, Professor Solomon Nagash will be curating your questions and moderating the Q&A session. It's 1:30 for Professor Nagash. So, and for some of the US team around the States from East Coast to West Coast. So we truly appreciate your commitment to MoSHE Advisory Council and being here at this time. The meeting will then be adjourned with a final remark by His Excellency Professor Afewerki Kasu. Participants, you are encouraged to type your questions to Mr. Casap or Professor Afewerki, not in the chat session, but in the QA question and answer section of the Zoom. Let's use the chat for chatting and question and answer for the questions that will be directed to Mr. Casap or Professor Afewerki at the end of the speeches. So, without further ado, I yield to Professor Afewerki.
Thank you, Betty. Excellencies, leaders of science and higher education and institutions of Ethiopia, respected academicians and researchers, distinguished chairs, co-chairs, and members of our MoSHE Advisory Council, Task Force on COVID-19 Response, dear Mr. Jamie Casap, Chief Global Education Evangelist, Google Inc., Ms. Bethlehem Gromberg, Chairperson of MoSHE AC Working Group on Equity and Access in Education and Innovation, Professor Solomon Nagash, Chairperson of MoSHE's Advisory Council's Working Group on Quality Education and Training, respected participants of this virtual meeting. I see 390 already joined, and the number is counting. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. On behalf of the Ministry of Science and Higher Education, I would like to welcome Mr. Jamie Casap and all to this virtual seminar entitled Innovative Solutions for Education, Insights and Experiences for Resource-Limited Countries. When we posted information about the seminar on our Facebook page yesterday, we received many interesting comments from our viewers. Impressive amongst them was the following. How can we attend this virtual meeting? Will it be live? It seems it is the right meeting at the right time with the right resource person from the right free online education platform provider, Google Inc. Our guest, Mr. James Casap, it's an honor to welcome you virtually to Ethiopia today. We hope you will visit us in person one day post-COVID and see the ample opportunities and hunger we have for technology in education in Ethiopia, a very ancient country, which we say the cradle for humanity, and home for Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy, our mother. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, the global pandemic of COVID-19 has put all of us, the global humanity, into a huge fear and has been costing us unprecedented loss of lives, men and women, children, adults, and the elderly. The global data from the World Health Organization shows that yesterday, by the end of yesterday, there were more than 4.2 million cases and more than 284 million deaths from COVID-19. In Ethiopia, we have a total of 250 people who were tested positive for the virus and 5 deaths so far. The global, continental, and country-specific damage from the COVID-19 is huge in terms of social, economic, political, cultural, psychological, environmental, and other impacts. In this regards, we all are in this together. The fear from increasing positive infection is disrupting our normal routines. The pandemic has forced us to close schools and universities. Our students are at home. Worldwide, there are currently more than 1.2 billion children in 183 countries affected by school closures due to the pandemic. In Ethiopia alone, the number is around 30 million students from kindergarten to 12 to universities. This is a very huge number. In Ethiopia, because of this, all the 45 public universities that report to the Ministry of Science and Higher Education are scrambling to deliver their in-person or blended classroom teaching sessions to an online one. This has been frustrating for both the students and the educators, as it requires adjustment to the unfamiliar and greater learning curve on the part of the students as well as faculty. This is even further complicated by the meager infrastructure to get the job done. Because of this, we are seeking for partnerships and collaborations with the broader global educational community, people with subject matter expertise, and education platform providers. In this context, our today's seminar is an opportunity to pave paths of collaboration with the global technology giant, Google, via its Chief Global Education Evangelist, Mr. James Casap. We expect Mr. Casap to shed light on the kinds of resources available for Ethiopia through Google, and also to connect us with the right resources and people. Dear participants, setting expectations by educators and being flexible to accommodate the variety of students' situations makes for an easier transition and experience. But it's not easy. For higher education leaders, for educators and instructors, I'm sure it will require your creativity, and improvisation in light of the infrastructure challenge we face. At the end of this semester, though, you will be an expert and will accumulate invaluable skills and insights on e-learning and online education. The pandemic of COVID-19 will change our education forever. This might be our new normal for the foreseeable future. In this wave of technological advancements in the world, education has already started to change dramatically with the distinctive rise of e-learning, whereby teaching is undertaken remotely and on digital platforms. Research suggests that online learning has been shown to increase retention of information and take less time, encouraging real-time collaboration as one-stop shop. As a developing nation, for Ethiopia, this requires a rapid capacity expansion, which is in conflict with our significant challenge of no or very little previous training or expertise, insufficient bandwidths, and little content preparation. Compounded is the students' critical challenge of access to electricity, networks, support, and hardware such as laptops, tablets, and cell phones with the right technology. Despite the above mentioned challenge, with technical support from our advisory council members, we have started to address the problem by training academic staff members about online teaching, collecting lectures and teaching materials such as PowerPoint files, e-textbooks, and reference books, lecture videos, etc., and making them accessible to students from a central location. We are also encouraging academicians to engage their students virtually for courses, seminars, master's and PhD thesis works using technology. We believe today's seminar will shed some light on how to transit from classical teaching to a strengthened online technology-supported teaching. In this regard, my ministry, the Ministry of Science and Technology, Science and Higher Education, is developing policy documents and working hard by laying the foundations towards capacity building. Dear participants, we heard our guest, Mr. Jamie Casap, evangelizes the power and potential of the web, technology, and Google tools. We also heard Mr. Casap has been part of the original team that launched Google Apps for universities, launched Google Apps from K through 12 schools, and helped get Chromebooks off the ground into schools. Mr. Casap also works with teams that impact education, including working with educational organizations around the world, helping them find ways to improve the quality of education through use of technology. Improving the quality of higher education by using technology is what the Ministry of Science and Higher Education is trying to accomplish. It's our hope that the ministry and Google will work together to impact the quality of higher education in Ethiopia by bringing in useful technologies, not only during these challenging times due to COVID-19, but also during post-COVID times for long-term collaboration as we strive to move towards e-learning. In this regard, the Ministry of Science and Higher Education is committed to establish and strengthen sustainable cooperation with Google. Finally, I would like to thank Mr. James Casap, the Chief Global Evangelist, Google Inc., for his time and interest to share with us his thoughts on innovative solutions to education. Our thanks are also to chairpersons of our MoSHE Advisory Council, Ms. Bethlehem Gromberg and Professor Solomon Nagash, and others for connecting us with Mr. Jamie Casap and Google. Finally, I wish all of us to have productive discussions with Mr. Casap and other technologists on this technology. Thank you very much. Back to you, Betty.
Without further ado, Mr. Casap, it's your
Thank you.
floor.
Thank you very much for having me. That was a great introduction, Betty. I don't know what else to say. I think you've covered everything. So let me start by welcoming you to my home, my studio here in Phoenix, Arizona. This is where I work. I've been here for the past 12 years. I actually am not part of a Google office. They keep me away from the other Googlers. So I'm stationed here in Arizona, and I've been working from my studio for the past 12 years, preparing for this pandemic, because while everyone is trying to scramble to figure out how to work from home, I've already figured it out. I figured it out for the past 12 years. I think Betty covered a lot of the background. I'm not going to get into my background. I just want to say that I have a passion for education because of the way I grew up. As mentioned, I believe that education disrupts poverty. I believe education changes families' destinies. And for me, the greatness of a place like the United States, for me, is that I'm an immigrant. My mother, actually, I was born in the United States, but my mother came to America from Argentina. And I was raised by a single mother. I was born in New York. I was raised on social services and food stamps and what we used to call welfare. Back in the 1970s and 1980s in New York City, in a place called Hell's Kitchen, New York. And it deserved the name back then. It was a terrible place, very violent place. Not, it wasn't necessarily, not that kids didn't go to college, kids just didn't live. It was, I went to lots of funerals while I was growing up there. It was the middle of the violent New York City. It was in the middle of the crack epidemic. And I didn't want anything to do with that. And so when I looked for success, what I noticed was it was education. Education was the common denominator of successful people. So that's what I focused on. And I was able to graduate high school, I graduated college, and I graduated graduate school. And I've had a pretty amazing, not only just career, I've had a pretty amazing life since graduating from graduate school. I've traveled all over the world. I was telling the group before we got on live that one of the highlights of my life is I got to spend a month and a half in Eastern Africa, in Nairobi, Zanzibar, and Rwanda. And it was one of the highlights of my life. This was 12 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. And the appreciation that I have for my life comes from understanding that all this is possible through education. Now, I can make one of two assumptions, and this is the problem that I'm trying to solve. The problem I'm trying to solve is, how do we make more me's? How do we get more students who have my background, grew up the way I grew up, or growing up the way I grew up, to succeed? And the working theory is that I can make one of two assumptions. I can assume that the reason I have been successful, and besides being in Africa for a month and a half, traveling around the world, I worked for Governor Cuomo for 2 years. I worked at Accenture, a consulting company. I've been at Google for 14 years. And I look at all the things that I've been able to accomplish. I can say that I've done all that because I'm some sort of super genius with a 500 IQ. And that's what my wife thinks I think. Or we can assume that there are millions of students like me around the world who have the same ability, have the same capacity, have the same capability, and there's something missing. There's opportunity missing. There's access missing. That there are millions of students who are just like me around the world who have the problems that they want to solve that can change the world, and we're missing out on that opportunity. And so that's the problem that I am focused on. And there are lots of ways to solve that problem, including through early primary education, through secondary education, through post-secondary education, through work, through programs at work, through nonprofits. There's a million ways to tackle that problem. But I want to talk about education as that silver bullet, that thing that we should focus on right now, because I think it's the easiest, believe it or not. Now, why I'm passionate about education and why I'm passionate about education now is that we have an opportunity in front of us. For 150 years, we've been teaching basically the same way across the world. And that methodology, the traditional methodology of teaching, served us pretty well for a very long time. It didn't serve everyone. It didn't have equal access, but for the most part, you know, we've progressed. You can't say that we haven't progressed as humans for the past 150 years. Although some would argue here in the United States, we're going a little backwards, but that's a whole other problem. But this idea that we have used education to get smarter, to, you know, build trains and fly airplanes and make televisions and everything else, education's been the backbone to all that. So I don't go with this idea that education is broken or that it needs to be transformed. I think it's a little deeper than that. For me, it's a calling. I believe that we today have an opportunity to make education, to take education and mold it for the future that we face. That those of us in education have the same responsibility that those of us in education had 150 years ago, and ask ourselves, what's the right model for the future that we face? And in order to ask that question, we need to understand the future. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that future looks like. And again, because I get to be at Google for 14 years and I get to travel around the world, it's a clear understanding that today we live in a digitalized economy. In some places, it's a lot deeper than in other places, but that's what we live in today. We live in digitalization. And by digitalization, I mean the whole package. Computer science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, AR, VR, robotics, automation, augmented reality, all of that, the whole package. That's digitalization. And every business, every organization, every state, every country is figuring out how they're going to create solutions using digitalization. That's the future that we face. But we have to understand that we are at the very, very, very beginning of this. We are just getting started with this. And I want to give you an example. Google recently announced a breakthrough in quantum computing. And I'm not going to get into defining what quantum computing is, but it's important to understand what the breakthrough is. The breakthrough is this. If you take a calculation, a mathematical calculation, that one of those that spins on forever, and you gave that calculation to a supercomputer, the world's most powerful supercomputer, it would take that supercomputer 10,000 years to calculate the equation, to go through the equation. The breakthrough that we had in quantum computing is that now we can do it in 300 seconds. 10,000 years versus 300 seconds. What is it that we're going to be building next? What is it that we're moving towards? And so digitalization has become part of a solution, part of an answer to everything that we are going to build from here on end. That's just the way it is. And so what we need to understand is that the language to this digitalization is technology and computer science. That computer science is a language that students need to understand so that they can create solutions, because that's the expectation. And not everyone needs to become a computer scientist, although the world needs lots of computer scientists. It's an understanding that all of us need to understand computer science, how it works, why it works, what you can do with it, so that we can create solutions. It's very similar to English. Many of us had to learn English. English is technically my second language. Spanish is my first. But many of us needed to understand English to function in the world. And it didn't mean that we were going to become novelists. It just meant we needed to understand the language to thrive. Well, I believe that computer science is the second language that we now need to understand, because all that whole digitalization is built on computer science. And if you don't understand it, then you're not going to be able to create solutions. And I'll give you an analogy. I'm sitting right now in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. And by car, I am 12 minutes from the airport. Now, imagine I had to create a solution that gets me from my seat right here in downtown Phoenix to the airport, but I don't know that cars exist. That's not one of my solution categories. What kind of solutions would I create to solve the problem of getting me from here in downtown Phoenix to the airport? I might come up with a great solution for walking. I might come up with a roadmap of how I get to travel there, how long I need to leave, how many miles do I have to walk, what time will it get me there? I can come up with a really good solution for walking to the airport. But if I don't know that cars exist, am I going to come up with the best solution? And so understanding digitalization, understanding technology, understanding computer science is going to open up our minds to think about possible solutions to all the problems that we face. Because it doesn't matter whether you're building a private product, like a camera, or creating a solution to solve hunger issues in remote areas of a country. Digitalization is going to be part of all of that. So our students need to understand that. And so if that's the future, then we have to ask ourselves, well, what is it that we teach our students? And the first thing we have to understand is that digitalization is replacing a lot of work. And I would make the argument that if I was a business owner today, I would see human labor as my biggest risk. As a business person, I would try to automate and create robotic transactions around as many products and service processes as I could, because I don't want to have people at home and not be able to work. So I believe that as fast as you think automation, machine learning, and robotics has taken over work, I believe that it's going to happen faster. I mean, today you can buy a self-driving car. What is that going to look like in 10 years? What is that going to do to people who drive things for a living? You look at here in the United States, we have essential workers that have to work during this pandemic, and we consider grocery store workers as essential workers. And in the same breath that we can say they're essential workers, I can guarantee you that they won't be essential workers for much longer, because we already have the technology to do self-service checkout. We already have the technology to scan ourselves into a store and with camera setups and algorithms and everything set up and sensors, just take things off our shelf and put them in a bag and then just walk out of the store and get charged for everything. Amazon today has those stores available. So these essential workers, with the leapfrogging way that technology works, they're not even essential anymore. So we can say they're essential workers, but they're not going to be essential workers next year or the year after. And so what that means is that robotics, automation, machine learning, all these things are coming for lots of parts of our job. Now, does this mean that all jobs are going to disappear? No. It means that other jobs are being created, different jobs. But because robotics and automation and technology is replacing parts of our jobs, it means that we're going to need higher skills that are better than the machines to compete in the world. Another great example is ATM machines. Here in the United States in the 70s, when ATM machines started, everyone was talking about how that was the end of the banking industry, that nobody was going to work in the banking industry. There wasn't going to be anyone working in banks. There wasn't going to be anyone working in any banking role at all because machines were going to do it all. And that came true. There's lots of machines that are doing lots of banking things. But at the same time, there are more people working in the banking industry here in the US than ever before in history. There's actually more people working in banks today than there was when ATMs were introduced. They're just doing a different job. They're doing a higher level skill job. So using the grocery store example, if I could check myself into a store and I don't need essential workers to do what I call process work, which is stand there and grab your food and scan it and then put it in a bag. If I don't need people to do that, does that mean I don't have to hire people? The answer is no. It means I have to hire different people. Because now I can hire specialists. I can hire cooks, food experts, nutritionists, dietitians, people that can help my customers guide through the store and help them find the things that they're looking for and have a level of expertise about the products and services that are in the store. Higher level skill, probably the same number of workers. So what that means is that we really need to focus on our critical skills. And that, to me, is the thing that's being pulled out of this pandemic across the world. We want to make sure that our students are developing the human skills that they need to thrive in this digitalized world. And it's the list that we've been talking about for a very long time, but we have to look at it now with a new sense of urgency. Because if we still focus on getting our students to memorize things and then taking a test and either passing or failing that test and not thinking about or realizing that a machine can do better on the test than a human, we have to ask ourselves why we're doing that. Because there's clearly things that machines can't do that humans do way better. So what are those things? Well, again, there's a list that we've been talking about for a long time. Problem solving, collaboration, the ability to work, the ability to learn, creativity, and critical thinking. No one that is in the education space is surprised by anything on that list. That's my personal list. And no one should be surprised because we've been talking about this list for so long, we call them 21st century skills. You've heard that term, 21st century skills. We're 20 years into the 21st century. These are skills now. I believe that we call them 21st century skills because it gives us a way to be lazy about it. It makes us feel like 21st century is way down there. Like they're skills for the future. When in reality, we are 20 years into the 21st century. And so those skills become absolutely critical. And here's the good news, because I've seen some of the questions about, and some of the discussion topics around how do you get to rural areas? How do you get to places that don't even have electricity? How do you get to places that don't have technology or laptops? By the way, if you've noticed, I haven't talked at all about laptops and technology. I'm just talking about what's happening. But you have to understand that all those problems are temporary problems in the long scheme of things. When I joined Google, only 14% of the world was online. In 1995, only 1% of the world was online. Today, most people don't realize that only 50% of the world is online. But it's gone from 14% to 15%, and then it's going to go to 70% and 90%, and the technology is going to keep building and go faster. It won't be very long before connectivity isn't an issue because of satellite connectivity and balloon connectivity and drones and all these other things that people are building. So it's a temporary problem. It's a real problem, but it's temporary. But here's the magic of this, that those skills that I just talked about, problem solving, collaboration, creativity, those things don't need any technology at all. Those are human skills. And if we can design and create curriculums to help our students develop those skills, while we wait for the technology to catch up to us, then we will be ahead of the game. I have a 5-year-old. Every day when she wakes up, the 5 things I think about: how do I help her learn how to problem solve? How do I help her learn how to collaborate? And in a 5-year-old language, it's called share. How do I help her learn how to learn? And we'll talk about that in a second. How do I help her be more creative? And how do I help her with critical thinking? And I could go all day and never touch a laptop or the internet. So there's things that we can do to teach human skills, because those are going to be the critical ones in the future, or right now, right? We need right now. And so when I look at that list, I think about problem solving, for example. I'll share a story with you. I've been teaching my daughter computational thinking since she was 3 years old and never touched a laptop to do it. I would walk into her room. We're getting ready to go to the park, and I go into the room with my t-shirt on top of my head. And she says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Let's go to the park. I'm ready." She says, "That's not where your shirt goes." I'm like, "Where does my shirt go?" "It goes on your body." "Oh, okay." So I take it off my head and I put it on my body. And I'm like, "This is not working. It keeps falling off." And then she says, no. Listen, it goes on your arm. You got to put it through your arm. So I take the whole thing and I shove it on my arm. I'm like this. And then she's like, "Okay, it looks like I'm going to have to walk you through all this." And then she's walking me through it. On Sunday, what's today? Monday. On Sunday, yesterday, we made pancakes. And the directions on the back of the pancake box said half a cup of the baking, or of the powder, half a cup of milk, and an egg. So I put the powder in, I put the milk in, and then I took the whole egg and I put it right into the batter. And I'm making pancakes with my daughter, my 5-year-old. And she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "It says 1 egg. I'm following the directions." And so now she's got to break down why the directions are like that and how she would write them so that people don't make mistakes like that. Computational thinking. So you can teach these things in everyday life. And that's the best part about some of these skills, is that we can teach them in everything that we do. And they are the most critical things, because human skills are the things that machines can't do well. And when you look at that list, the most important one that we can focus on right now, the one that has stood out above the others given this pandemic, is the ability to learn. We've done a terrible job teaching our students how to learn. And how to learn starts with, it's not about, when I say how to learn, I don't mean how to outline a textbook, how to take a test, how to listen in class. That's not what I mean. The ability to learn starts with self-awareness. It starts with, I don't know how to do something. How can I learn how to do it? And then learn how to do it, and then ask yourself, did I learn how to do it? And be able to do an assessment as to whether or not you learned how to do it. So it's important to understand that that self-awareness is what's going to drive students in the future. They're going to have to drive it, because again, with online learning, we've gone from this traditional model where our teachers and educators can be in the same room with 30 students and be there as a guide and help them and drive them this way and give them feedback right away. Now those students are home and they're on their own. And so the ability to learn becomes absolutely critical. And the important thing about this idea of the ability to learn is that it changes language. So, and when a student says, I'm not good at math, it changes that to, I need to learn math. Adults say to me all the time, I'm not very creative. I'm not good with finance. I'm terrible with technology. And my response back to the adults is, no, you've chosen not to be good at technology. You've chosen not to be good at finance, and you've chosen not to be creative, because everything that you need to learn is out there. And sometimes you need technology to do that. And it's absolutely important that we all, across the board, look at broadband access, technology, devices as the most critical thing that we can focus on, because, not because we're missing out, but because of the ability to learn, and what you can do with those tools is amazing. When I was 11 years old, we didn't have computers. And if you ask me what happened on, December 7th, 1941, and if I didn't know, I would say, I don't know, but I'm going to go find out, and I'll be back tomorrow and I'll tell you. Because I had to go to the library and I had to find a book and I had to look it up. I still learned it, but it took me a really long time to go find that information. Today, any 11-year-old can tell you in a second what happened on December 7th, 1941. The amount of information that's out there, the ability to get to information and learn is incredible, and it's never been like this in the history of the world. I launched a YouTube channel last year. And when I launched my YouTube channel, I knew nothing about film. I knew nothing about editing. I asked my daughter, who has a degree in film, where do I start? And she said, shoot at 24 frames per second, double your shutter speed, and keep your ISO at 100. And I said, cool, thank you. Okay, here's my second question. What do any of those words mean? No clue, nothing. I knew nothing. And in a year, I taught myself how to be good at video. I've taught myself how to edit videos. I've taught myself how to set up my studio the way you're looking at it here. All this is possible because all the information in the world is online, and I can learn if I have a desire to learn. Now, if I didn't have access to this, there's still other ways to learn this, because the process is the same. I don't know how to do something. Where can I go learn how to do it? And how do I know whether I learned how to do it or not? And it's that self-awareness ecosystem that our students need. So we can select for them specific topics that they can dive deeper into. And if they have access to technology, great. And if they don't, they have to be smart enough to learn where they can learn that if they don't have access. And so the ability to learn seems to be the most important thing. So if we can focus our energy on teaching our students how to learn, then what we're doing is we're creating lifelong learners who will always be adaptable, who will always be able to keep building their skills because they'll be able to recognize when they're weak in one area and what they need to do to get better at it. Or as automation and robotics and technology keeps taking over parts of our jobs, they'll be able to keep upskilling themselves and keep getting better at what they do because they have the ability to learn. You see, education is a process. We look at it as a process. You are in education, you are educated, I'm an educator, you go through education. We even have checkpoints, right? First grade, second grade, third grade, sixth level, seventh level, graduation. Like, we have these checkpoints, these artificial checkpoints that we've put in place to say that you've gone from this step to this step to this step. But the reality is that education is a mindset. The barriers that we've put up about artificial levels of where you should be at by a certain age doesn't make any sense. The ability to learn is about self-awareness and driving that self-awareness to a completion and then getting better and better at what you do. So the ability to learn becomes one of the most critical things that we can focus on. And we can use technology to do that, or we can use other ways to do that. Now, let's say we have the technology. The second part to that, and the second most critical thing that we can focus on for our students that do have access to technology, that do have access to the internet, that do have access to devices, we have to teach them how to use these tools. We've given them a pass. Those students that are using technology, we call them digital natives. We tell them that they were born with technology, therefore they know how to use it. Yet all the evidence shows us that they don't know how to use it. So giving them access is part of the solution. Teaching them how to use these tools has to be part of the solution, because the numbers that I'm seeing are across the world are frightening. The number of students who can look at a piece of internet data, information, and not be able to tell that it's fake is mind-blowing to me. And so we need to be able to teach them how to use these tools. So giving them access is half the battle. Teaching them how to use it, teaching them how to vet information and make sense of information and where to go with information and what to do with information and how to take all that information that they have access to and convert that information into intelligence that they can use is part of the technology issue that we need to address. Now, that being said, and I want to make sure that I'm leaving time to answer questions. So I'm gonna leave as much time as I can to answer questions that you guys might have. Now, that being said, I created a video for parents on my YouTube channel a couple of months ago, a month and a half ago, that resonated with people. So you'd find that on my YouTube channel. And the video was advice for parents here in the United States. Because we took parents and we said, hey, congratulations, parents, you're now teachers. With no experience on how to teach, no expectations of what to teach. You are now teaching at home. Good luck. And so the advice that I gave parents is to relax and focus on the basics. Because at the end of the day, if we take away or eliminate these artificial barriers of you should know algebra by the time you're in this grade and you should know the history of World War II by the time you're in this grade, if we take those things out, the most basic things that we can do in education is get the fundamentals right. And the most fundamental thing that our students can do is read. Reading has to be part of the equation. And we can do that without technology, or we can do it with limited technology. You can take a tablet, you can take a $19 tablet and load it with 1,000 books and never have to connect it to the internet. And the thing stays powered for 3 weeks. It's one of the most low-cost ways to get information into students' hands, reading books. And so if our students develop a love for reading because they're reading things that they're passionate about or curious about or want to learn more about, that goes such a long way. I mean, think about how did we learn before we had technology? We read. And so reading becomes absolutely critical to teach. So the advice that I give parents is just get your kids reading again. Let them read what they want to read. Let them ask questions about the readings and have discussions about the books. Or better yet, if you're home with your kid anyway, why don't you both read the book and have a book club meeting about it? Reading becomes one of the most critical things that we can focus on. At the same time, in the same vein, mathematics becomes the second most important thing that we can focus on. Basic mathematics, and you don't need any technology to teach math. As a matter of fact, what I've told my 5-year-old since she was 3 years old, and this is a disservice that we've done to math in our schools, is I tell her that if she understands math, she understands the world, because everything in the world is made of math. Everything. There's a mathematical formula to everything. And if she can figure out the mathematical formulas, she can bend them. She can change them. It's like being inside the matrix. And math becomes the most critical thing to solve problems, especially in a world of digitalization. And she's 5 years old. She doesn't do math on the computer. She doesn't use the internet to do math. She watches television and does math. She has a workbook and she does math. She goes around during the day and counts things. And every couple of hours, she's like, hey, did you know that if you do this with these two numbers, this happens? And be making it part of their life, as math is a language that they can understand to control things, is a basic thing that our students need. And then the last one, and this goes back to what Betty talked about, the quote that I have all the time, is help our students drive their curiosity. Use their curiosity as the launch pad for learning. So that when my 5-year-old comes to me and says, hey, when you pull the drain in the bathtub, where does the water go? I don't say to her, oh, no. I'm looking at my curriculum here. No, we have to study space. You have any questions about space? No, I can dive deep into 8 hours answering questions about water, because I can take that one question, which is, where does water come from? And I can teach any subject that you mentioned. I can teach history. For example, did you know that the canal system that we based our water system on here in Phoenix was made by the Hohokam Indians 1,500 years ago? I can teach geology. Oh, we're in the desert, and obviously it doesn't rain that much. Let's figure out what the rain patterns are in a desert like the Sonoran Desert. How does that equate to other deserts in the world? I can teach math, obviously. What is the daily rainfall in a place like Arizona? Where does that water go? I can talk about climate change. How does climate change affect water? And what's the science that we know? And I can teach it at a 5-year-old level. I can go into what happens to precipitation and evaporation, and what happens when water falls from the sky, and why does it fall from one cloud and not another one? And what are the conditions for that to happen? I can talk about where does the water fall in reservoirs, and what do they do with the water in the reservoirs, and who created those pipes that get to our houses, and how were those built, and what material do they use to do that? I can talk about dams and why dams exist, and what are natural dams in the world, and why do animals create dams? I can go deep on one question, and I can use technology to explore a lot of these things, or I could just use the real world. And so helping them drive their curiosity and shaping our learning around the things that they're passionate about and they're curious about is how they're going to learn how to learn. And so if we can focus on those things, if we can focus on building the critical skills that they need, and if we can focus on the ability to learn, and if they have technology to use the digital tools that are available and use them correctly, and if we can focus on letting them drive their passion through their curiosity, it'll help them become these lifelong learners that we're trying to build. And the last point, Babe mentioned this, when we think about the future and we try to understand the future, the last question that we should be asking our students is, what do you want to be when you grow up? If you understand digitalization and you understand the future, you understand that the jobs of the future don't exist. Most jobs that we're going to be doing in 20 years, we don't even know about. I mean, look at it another way. When I graduated from college, when I graduated from graduate school, Google did not exist. How could I ever prepare for a job at Google when I graduated graduate school? So that question about what you want to be when you grow up is not a question that works anymore. It was a great question in the olden days, before 1995, but that question doesn't make sense anymore. The better question that we should be asking our students is, what problem do you want to solve? And it doesn't have to be a social problem. It could be any problem. Every business, every tool, everything that we're using right here, right now, is solving a problem. So it could be anything. And then the second question that we need to ask our students is, how do you want to solve that problem? How do you want to take your gifts, your passions, your talents, and solve that problem? And that's an important question, because there's a million ways to solve a problem. And it has to be individualized to the person. For example, if a student says to you, I want to solve climate change, let's say that's the problem that they want to solve. You might be inclined to say to them, oh, climate change, you need to be a scientist. You need to study STEM. You need to go get a degree in global sustainable development. True, there's lots of ways to solve the problem that way. But what if that student is an unbelievable storyteller? What if that student is a photographer, an unbelievably talented photographer? And he has this way of capturing the world through his camera or her camera. Maybe the way they can solve climate change is by documenting what's happening with climate change, or creating programs of education to solve climate change. We have to understand that there's a million ways to solve a problem. How do you want to take your gifts, your talents, and the things that you are passionate about to solve that problem is absolutely critical. And then the third question that we should be asking our students, and this is back to the ability to learn, what do you need to know to solve that problem? What are the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that you need to have to solve that problem? And how do we start building those knowledge, skills, and abilities? Both in terms of climate change and photography, because now we have two angles on this. What books are out there? What videos are out there? What letters are out there? What research is out there? Who's solving this problem now, and how can you connect with them to learn what they learned? I talk to high school students all the time, and I ask them if they're on LinkedIn, and none of them ever raised their hand. And I'm like, you're missing. Everyone who you want to become, every problem that you want to solve is on LinkedIn. And so we have to teach them how to learn so that they can develop the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to build to solve the problems that they're going to be passionate about. And if we do those things, if we do just one of those things, I think it brings us a long way to what we need to build for the future. And it has nothing to do with technology, although that's a segment of it. And it has nothing to do with access, although that's a segment of it. It has to do by building a mindset for our students around becoming lifelong learners, not because it's the right thing to do, not because it's the most humanistic thing to do, but because it's the most critical thing to do. that we now live in a world where the technology is going to move so much faster that we're going to have to constantly be able to learn. And so with that, I will close because I'm starting to lose my voice. And I don't know how many questions are coming in or what kinds of questions are coming in, or if people have just dropped off and stopped listening to me. So I will be glad to answer any of the questions that you guys see there and are appropriate.
Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate your insight. There is a lot of questions coming through. Predominantly, they focus on infrastructure, but I want to shift that because of what you have said. You are talking about education without technology is possible. Education without having to use the gadgets is possible. Curiosity and how to learn is more important. Can you share some experiences in that regard, that how can we change the attitude of teachers or the attitude of students when the predominant tradition that we see in advanced countries is to use technology, to do more with technology?
Sure.
Are we leaving our students behind if we don't teach them about those and focus on the other?
I want to be clear that the most important thing that we can focus on is infrastructure. It's broadband, it's connectivity. Those things is where we should put all our resources in, because, and not because it may, again, I just want to also be clear, not because it'll leave us behind, even though that will happen. I like to look at it in a positive way, which is we want to focus on those things because of the opportunity to learn that it delivers. And they're not going to be able to use it unless, if you set up broadband and you have high-speed internet access and you get devices in every kid's hand and those students do nothing but worksheets on those devices, you've done nothing. It's got to be focused on the learning part of it, because just taking technology and putting it on top of the current model is just going to get us the same results. All we've done is automate the old model. What we need to do is ask ourselves, what are the best ideas that we have in education? What's the best research shows us about what learning is and how to drive learning? And we know that none of this is a secret, right? There's been research paper after research paper about how student-led learning is the best kind of learning, how students have to own and do all the heavy lifting when it comes to learning, how teachers have to be more like coaches and not the experts to help our students become the experts and guide them along. There's a ton of research out there that shows us what good learning should look like. And if we have that research and we know those things, then what we should be asking is, how do we use technology to bring those ideas to life? So in terms of being behind, if all we've done in the United States, for example, is automate the old system, then we're not that far ahead. It's using that technology to drive new learning models that will make us go ahead. And there are schools here in the United States. I'll give you an example is I've been meeting with lots of students across the country in virtual rooms like this. And I've been talking to lots of educators. And the educators who control the classroom and did, you know, the old traditional model of education are struggling today because their students don't know how to learn. They've fallen apart. They can't control them. They can't get assignments in. They're all cheating, like all the things that you typically would have seen if you took a classroom and put it online. And then you have schools like the Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia, which I would encourage you to go visit, or High Tech High in San Diego, where they didn't miss a beat. They went from being in school to being at home and didn't miss a beat. Because in those schools, they teach our students how to learn. So all they did was now they got to work at home. They still have to collaborate, but now they have to collaborate through technology. They still have to do research, but now they have to do research on their own, which means that they have to know how to look for research and make sure they're good digital citizens. So we have to define what we mean by being behind. We have to define what it is that we want to do with this technology. So don't get me wrong, technology infrastructure is number one. As a matter of fact, here in the United States, the president, if that's what we want to call him, he even said that the most important thing to focus on in infrastructure coming out of this is broadband. There's lots of places in this country who have inadequate broadband service. I mean, some places have connectivity, but you're talking about like 2G connectivity. So there's places here in the US that need broadband, and we're recognizing it here. So absolutely, the most critical thing to focus on is creating a network and a broadband and having access, but not because we want to catch up to anyone, but because it can lead to some really powerful learning, but we have to change the models to do that.
I will come back to the infrastructure question in a second, but as a follow-up, for policymakers, we have policymakers here today and others listening. For policymakers, infrastructure is not bread. Infrastructure is not water. You can't drink it, you can't eat it. How can you prioritize that above all other things? I mean, why should I prioritize internet access when I have people that need to be fed? How would you advise on priority issues regarding infrastructure?
Yeah, no, that's tough, right? It's the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and you have to meet the basic needs first. And so you have that, I mean, survival's number one, right? Again, I grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York. I grew up in poverty, pure poverty. And I didn't have things, right? Like I didn't have anything. And, we lived in a small, rat infested apartment in New York. And the basic necessities is what you focus on. I wasn't thinking, I wonder what I'm going to be doing in my career. So I understand that that's the most important thing to focus on. What I'm saying is that in the education space, if we think about education and we want to prioritize things in education, whether that is buying a curriculum or buying more textbooks or, building more school buildings, those priorities, infrastructure and internet have to be on top of that list. That's what I mean.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of the questions also focus on how Ethiopia's demographics is regarding rural versus urban. Over 80% of the people live in rural areas. You mentioned the second language everybody should learn is computing language. Yeah. How would you teach? Can you give us some examples how to teach computing language to the broader masses, specifically rural areas?
Yeah, so I think that computer science is what I mentioned, not computer language. And there's a difference. It sounds like semantics, but it's not. Computer language is a tool you use in computer science, right? And so that means is that you learn a programming language. And if you don't use, and I don't recommend that actually, because if you're not using the computer language, then you're going to forget it, like any language, right? It's kind of like here in the United States, I swear every single American has taken 4 years of Spanish, and yet nobody can speak Spanish, right? Because they don't use the language. My friend took 8 years of Spanish and couldn't say 3 sentences in Spanish. And then she went to Mexico to work on a project for 6 months, and she came back speaking Spanish. Right? So if you're not using the language, you're not going to get out of it. So it's not about the language, it's about the science, the computer science. And when you break down computer science, and Betty could probably talk more about this than I can. If you break down the computer science into computational thinking, design principles, engineering principles, how problems get solved, those concepts we can teach without learning a programming language. The programming language is just the tool, the methodology to do that. Right? It's all the bigger, it's if I'm constructing the studio, computer science would be the fundamental things that I need to think about to build this studio. My hammer, the type of hammer that I use, and the type of tools that I use would be the language, but those can change over time. Those can be anything. But the structural things of what kinds of beams need to go in here, and why do I need a bearing wall, and what does the floor look like, and how do I insulate the place? That's computer science. And so understanding those concepts is important.
Thank you, thank you. You talked about the future and how these technology problems are going to disappear. You mentioned quantum computing. You mentioned the ability to access. 20 years ago, we didn't have any access. 20 years hence may be easy because of satellites and things like that. But for most questions, they're saying, we are in it now. Can you give some examples from other experiences that have made that leap, how they make that transition? And there are some questions as well. How can we partner with technology companies like Google to make those things a reality?
Yes. So I know that, let's talk about the last part first. I know that Google has an Africa team. I know we have offices there. I don't know if we have one in Ethiopia, but we have a presence there. And I know there's a team that is focused on emerging markets and using technology and all that. So definitely, you know, finding ways to connect with those folks and what they're doing is critical. I'm surprised that they're not already connected. So that's an easy follow-up. But what we need to understand is that technology is moving so fast that we're kind of stuck. And what I mean by that is, I remember East Africa being one of the first places to get 1 gig fiber lines connectivity. And then if that's true, that was like 10 years ago and the struggle was building that last mile, right? Getting the infrastructure to build the last mile. That's tough anywhere, right? The 50% number that only 50% of the world might have access to the internet isn't just a financial number. A lot of it has to do with reaching places in the world, right? For you to get through, you know, one town into another town to bring fiber, for example, or high-speed internet access, you have to run a cable. And how do you run a cable through Mount Everest, right? Like there's places that it's not a financial thing. It's just an infrastructure thing. It's a capability thing. And so in those situations, the technology that we need doesn't exist yet, right? Being able to beam a signal across a wide range, for example, right? And I know people have invented things like that, or being able to use satellites to beam down information, right? Like those types of solutions are coming. And so I think that having any internet access at all is good, but high-speed internet access is absolutely essential and critical. And to me, it's a temporary problem in the sense that we're going to solve these. It's just the technology needs to catch up to those things. But at the same time, we should be able to teach models, have models that don't require a lot of technology. Again, it's that worksheet example. And I've seen this in rural counties here in the United States. I've seen it in places in South America where they fight for internet access. And what they do with that internet access is they hand kids workbooks. They hand them electronic workbooks. And so they have internet access, but they're not learning. And then they turn around like, hey, you know what? Nothing's improved, right? When all they've done is automate the old model. So it's important to be smart about what it is that you build and how do you use these tools to advance the concepts of learning as we know them today.
Thank you. I think our time is almost over. So I'll ask the last question regarding devices. There are questions regarding devices.
Yeah.
You mentioned about loading thousands of books and not need any additional technology to read.
Yeah.
Most of the prevalent technology, a lot of them mentioned, is the mobile phone. What's the minimum that we need, and how can we do the transition? If you can comment on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when I When I was in Kenya, I was visiting a school. So this is 12 years ago. And I was talking to the principal of the school, and he was saying, you know what we need here is we need internet access. And behind him, literally behind him, there were 5 boys on their mobile devices. And like the irony of that for me is like, you do have access to the internet. Those students were on the internet, right? They were texting, they were using their devices to do things. And so we have to be smart about how we utilize the tools that are available to us. And again, the cost of the technology is going lower and lower and lower. So one of the proudest things that for me, being at Google, is the launch of the Chromebook. Because before the Chromebook, you think about a laptop computer was, you know, $5,000, or a MacBook computer from Apple was $2,500 or whatever that was. The Chromebook was, you know, you can get a Chromebook for $200 and US dollars. And now you need connectivity to the internet, but we even build things into the Chromebook where you don't need, you can download things onto the hard drive of a Chromebook and then use everything offline. So the cost of the technology is getting lower and lower. But I think that as that happens, you find lots of, you know, LG tablets, or you have Kindles, you know, first generation Kindles that cost like $19, where you can load, you know, 1,000 books on them and use that as a reading device. So I just think that we can be smarter. Again, what if I said to you, what's the most important thing you want to focus on? And you said, we want our kids to be reading, then we would create a solution for that. And so I think it's important to point out what are the learning objectives that you're trying to meet, not focus on the technology, but what are the learning objectives? And then I bet you we can come up, I'll be happy to come out and help you guys think about this. What are the things that are out there now that can help us get to that learning objective with what resources we have?
Thank you for the offer to come to Ethiopia and maybe help in solving these things. In that regard, what advice would you give? The last question I'm going to ask, what advice do you give to our policymakers? We have high-income countries with a lot of resources, a lot of technologies, and we have low-income countries with minimal or no infrastructure access. Do we think differently? Do we have to perceive education differently? What do you advise to policymakers?
Yeah, so my advice is to focus on the most, again, policymakers have to be futurists. And that's sometimes hard for policymakers because they're so in the now, right? Especially for elected officials who have to think about the next election or have to think about the next thing. So it's hard to be a futurist and think about 10 years or 20 years down the line. But that's what we need to do as policymakers, is think about what's coming. What does the world look like in 10, 20 years? And then build solutions around that. And I think if we do that, what you'll notice is working on the fundamentals and building the learning models that we need for our kids to be able to learn anything that they want to learn whenever they want to learn it, and that digitalization is right there and it's coming. Look, today, if you think about the next generation of students, and by the way, just keep this in mind, the United States is a technology-rich country, and yet where are we on the PISA line? You know, where are we on the international reading lines? Where are we on the international math lines? That doesn't seem to be helping us, right? We have the same issues here. I have the same arguments that I'm having, not that we're having an argument, but I make the same arguments to superintendents here in the States. This is not an Ethiopia problem. This is a mind shift problem. And so getting them to look at the world differently, again, ask yourself, here's a simple rule for a policymaker. If a machine can do this better, why are we teaching humans to do it?
Thank you. I'll pass that to you, Betty.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jamie, for such an insightful and inspirational speech, just like I expected it. I would like for you to finish your thoughts on what advices do you have for students, undergraduates that are at home right now and not being part of the online learning system in Ethiopia, as well as the educators who are trying to get their materials into the online system, perhaps for the very first time. So after that, we'll pass it to Professor Upwork.
Yeah, so I think for students, and I talk to students all the time, and what I tell them the same thing I said earlier, which is to think about, especially our older students, what's that problem that you want to solve? Use this opportunity, use this time to dive deeper into understanding yourself and understanding that problem that you're passionate about. And then whatever time you have left over, use that time to figure out what you need to learn to solve that problem. And then if you have more time, start learning those things, right? And this idea that I tell students, like, you can learn all day. You can spend from 6 in the morning to 11 at night learning all day, go to sleep, and the next morning your brain is empty again and you can do it all over again. So there is no full meter on a brain. And so constantly learning and constantly feeding that knowledge will help you advance, help you think about things in a different way. For teachers, I would focus on the fundamental things that they should get right? What are the learning objectives that you're trying to reach your students? Not what tests are you trying to prepare for? Not what are you trying to, what curriculum material you need to reach, but what are the learning objectives? What do you want your students to know how to do? And then let's find creative ways to solve that, to get them to learn those things, given the circumstances that we're in.
Awesome. Professor?
Thank you very much, Jamie, Professor Solomon, and Betty, for this very inspirational and inspiring presentation and discussion we had this morning in Addis Ababa in Ethiopian time, and evening and late night in the Western Hemisphere. I have 3 major points as closing remarks from Jamie's very inspiring presentations. The first is, education is the silver bullet that disrupts poverty. So my part of the world has many things to do to deal with poverty. Due to this ugly pandemic we are suffering now, the poverty level is growing, which is also fueled by large number of economic and social and other problems we are facing. So we need to bring in innovative education solutions, as nicely mentioned, and by nice examples put forward by Jamie. We need innovative education solutions and technologies to graduate from the challenge we are facing now. Even Madiba, our inspirational leader in Africa, Nelson Mandela long ago, was using the same saying, Jamie, you were saying, education is the powerful weapon and tool to disrupt poverty. And that's much needed in Africa, that's much needed in Ethiopia. So whatever we do in education, whatever investments we invest, the policies we bring in, the strategies we put in place, the specific directives, guidelines we put on education are critically important, not only for today, for the better future we are aspiring to have in the future. So your points on the importance of education are very important, and we hope to have more of your time in the future if you manage to get some time so that we can inspire more participants. Today, even right now, we have 509 participants online. You can imagine how interested my colleagues in Ethiopia are to learn from you and from big leaders, education evangelists like you. My second point is your important point on teaching the 21st century skills, the importance of the human skills. Those human skills are critically important. In line with that, my ministry, my government has put in place a new revised education policy. We are working on a new roadmap, and that roadmap has clearly outlined the importance of the human skills, the communication skills, the collaboration skills, etc., which are critically important for the time we are in now, and also the time which is waiting for us, ahead of us. So those points are critically important. They are also in line with our national policies and the strategies. We need to build on those skills. I see a good number of participants online. I want participants, educators, researchers, practitioners, and evangelists like you to promote these skills. And as you said, by picking example from your 5 years old child, we need to teach our children from that early age all the way to university by giving them the challenge so that they need to solve problems. To solve problems, they need to go the traditional way, or they may need to make use of technology. This takes me to my other point, the importance of technology, infrastructure, and others to enhance education and bring quality to education in my part of the world, in Ethiopia. As again asked by Professor Solomon and Betty, technology is critically needed in my part of the world. We have like over 1 million higher education students. We are now with their parents. Ethiopia is a country where 80% of our population are rural residents. You can imagine the need for technology there. Unless we connect the other human skills you mentioned to learning to our students by some mechanism, it's very difficult to keep our students connected with education, with higher education. The same from K to 12 too. So technology is much needed. That's why most of my colleagues were writing in the chat board about the importance of technology, the importance of platforms, technological platforms like the Google platforms, Google apps that would make the life of our students and teachers easy. So I hope in our next seminar with you or with your colleagues or with your networks in East Africa, we will be working more, discussing more on how to better make use of what we have at hand, how to become more innovative and make things possible for our children now, for our young adults who will be leading Ethiopia, Africa, and contributing to the growth of the world in the future post-COVID. So with this, I go to my final point of thanking you, Jamie, our brother. On behalf of my ministry, please allow me to appreciate and thank you for the time you have shared with us today, and also for your promise to help Ethiopia and Africa with technology and with the big thoughts you shared with us today. Then I need to go to my sister Bethlehem, who brought this thinking last year to Ethiopia with her company, You Code Girl. She collected 130 school girls, high school girls. She put them into a classroom assisted by software engineering students. In 5 days, the students managed to capture basics of coding. And the challenges she gave them was to find problems around their environment, put that problem into their thinking, come up with the coding and come up with a solution. So thank you, Betty, for that. And I hope you will continue working with us, working with Google, working with Jamie, and continue in that line. Professor Solomon, your support to us in education delivery at the bigger scale through our Ministry of Science and Higher Education Advisory Council's education delivery team is giving us interesting results. Please keep on helping us. We appreciate and value your commitment and support to us. All others, including Professor Damto, who is our chair of chairs, who has again joined us this morning. Our advisory council chairs are doing a great job. And we want you and our chairs and others to continue working with us, because what they are doing is giving us important results, showing us the way to move faster. So thank you very much, Professor Damto, for today and also for your big leadership. My final point is to all participants who are interested to stay with us. Now I have 500 participants. Thank you very much for your time and interest. Please go home with the home tech message of Jamie, Betty, and Professor Solomon. Education is the tool, and we need to put together our innovative skills, our homegrown skills, by looking into our environment, by putting together what we have in our environment, so that we can challenge the challenge which is challenging us now. With this, our today's session is over. Thank you very much again, all of you, for your time, interest, and commitment. Thank you. በጣም አመሰግናለን።
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a great
Thank you so much. Professor, thank you.